Okay, welcome back. Okay, so I hope everybody had a good weekend, and we're gonna move on with the micro stuff. So we got a few more chapters to cover and some more material before the second take-home midterm. So we have essentially this week, and then next week we'll do a new chapter, and then we're gonna start introducing the second exam, which is still a ways away, but due on April 19th, so in like 3 weeks. Um, So we've got the second we covered four types, or we introduced four types of markets in last week's lecture, and so we talked about peer competition and peer monopoly, both of those in chapter 7 and chapter 8. And today we'll talk about the other two types of markets, which kind of come in between peer competition and peer monopoly, which in those cases we're going to cover monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So this will complete the kind of the study of the four markets. Um, but again, there's lots more you can do with these types of markets and these types of examples, especially oligopoly, which will cover game theory. And so there's if you were to take a more just micro only course, you would spend a lot more time on these materials. So actually, you could take whole classes just on oligopoly, which are on kind of game theory stuff. So we'll kind of do the basics. We'll finish the four markets, and then we'll do some basic game theory, which is a little bit different, but I think you'll find it kind of interesting and useful. And yeah, okay. So chapter 9 tonight, and remember there was two chapters last week, and so the chapter 7 and the chapter 8 homework are both due today. And so make sure you get those in, or let me know if you have any questions there. Looks like we still have a bunch of yeah. So make sure you get those in tonight. Um, okay, so we'll go ahead and start chapter 9. Um, I can go to study guides and open up the study guide for chapter 9 along with the Excel file, which has some of the stuff on the game theory. So chapter 9. Okay, and then I'm just going to pull up the examples for chapter 9. We'll get to those a little bit later. Okay, and if you want to open up, go to the PowerPoints and get the one for chapter 9. Okay, and we'll get to the homework assignment later. Okay, so chapter 9 is going to introduce or talk about the two additional types of markets that'll complete our study of the four market structures. And so we'll talk about here monopolistic competition and then oligopoly and what those types of markets entail. Okay, so the first one we'll talk about today is called monopolistic competition, which kind of comes after peer competition, but it's not nearly as firm dominant as monopoly. So let's introduce this type of market on slides 2 to 6, and we'll talk about some features and examples when we get through the basics. Okay, so monopolistic competition is some of the features that there's a relatively large number of sellers. All right, so there's really no limit on the number of firms that can compete in this market. And one of the keys really is they're differentiated products. And so these firms are selling the same type of good or service, but there's different brands, there's different features. And so it's a lot different than peer competition because remember in peer competition, we essentially assume that all the firms were selling the same good. And so here they're selling the same type of good, like they're all, well, we'll come with some examples, but those goods have, you know, specific brands or specific features that make that product a little bit unique, but it's still in the same type of good or service. Okay, firms can easily enter and exit this type of market, and advertising plays a big role because it's really a good way to get to differentiate your product, which you're kind of competing in the same realm with other firms, but you might have a different feature or something that makes it a little bit unique, and you can use advertising as a way to convince the customer or to get or also a way to get like brand loyalty. Okay, so we're going to talk about how advertising plays a big role in this type of market and also the next type of market, which is oligopoly. Okay, so the idea here is that demand is not going to be perfectly elastic, but it's going to be much more flat. So demand is going to be elastic, which essentially means, remember from chapter 3, that there's a lot of substitutes. The consumer can shop around, they have choices. And like uh, pure competition, there's going to be short run profits or losses, where firms can make a little profit in the short run or a big profit in the short run, or if things don't go well, there can be losses in the short run. In the long run, there's going to be kind of a normal profit, so not zero profit like we assume in pure competition in the long run. So there's still, if you're able, basically, if you're able to stay in this market in the long run, you do make a profit, but it's a little more difficult to stay in because you got to be able to compete with these other firms selling the same type of products. So let's. So what are so I would say that of all the types of markets we're talking about here, that most goods and services go into this type. All right, most goods go into the elastic region or the elastic type of market. And so, can we think of some examples of what good or service might be a monopolistic competition type of good or service? So most likely, if you throw out an example, it's going to be correct. But what are some examples of some good or service that might be sold by firms under monopolistic competition? Can we throw some ideas in the chat? Or well, so I'm looking for the like the type of good or service, not specifically the the title of the firm. So Amazon sells some goods that are that are under monopolistic competition, but some that are not. And so what are something that Amazon sells? Okay, so let's I'll just pick a few things that Amazon sells, which would be so how about here's some examples, and then we can um well so okay so I want you to think of the not the I mean the actual good or service being sold, like a pair of shoes or a book or electronic or something like that. So I'm trying to isolate the specific good or service so I can talk about different examples. And so yeah, there's all kinds of things that are sold under Prime with 2 day shipping um, under Amazon. But what are the like? What are just some examples of a good or service you would buy on Amazon? Like that's the so here. Okay, here's some. Amazon Fire Stick. So that would actually, I mean, save that for the next example, the oligopoly, because that's going to come. That's something where there's so if there's only a few options, like there are some other options, like what's the Roku, and there's probably some Apple version of that, like some mini Apple TV, but there's only like 4 or 5 options for that type of technology, and so that's going to be actually a great example of the oligopoly. So when I say for examples of oligopoly, which we'll do in the second half of the chapter, that you have an answer there. But we need so here's some examples of goods that are sold that I would probably classify under monopolistic competition. All right, so things like that. So you see how that it's a specific type of good, but if you went on Amazon and looked for shoes, you'd see thousands of different sellers or thousands of different brands. You get running shoes, you get high heels, you can get sandals, you can get all kinds of things. And in those individual like running shoes, there's different features and different sellers. Uh, there's Nike, there's Adidas. Cereal. If you go to the store, all the cereal is pretty much this. It's $5, it's $6, it's in the 5 to 10 range, and but you get different features. You get sugar cereal, you get granola cereal, you get Raisin Bran, right? All different types. Hats, there's all different types of hats, and books as well. So things where there's all kinds of different firms in that market, but they're all competing to sell like their specific brand of shoes, their specific style of shoes, and stuff like that. All right, so I think all these four examples and many more, you can think of hundreds of firms or thousands of firms that compete in those markets, and thousands of different options for books, hats, cereal, and especially shoes. All right, so most clothing items are under this type of market. Actually, like yeah, most clothing items, lots of food items in the grocery store that compete under here. So things like that. All right, and so we've got and probably like okay, noticeably lately, craft beers, or I mean, lately before the shutdown, but there's been quite a bit of an interest in this market, and so you could go to many different all these craft beer breweries are selling beer, but they have different slightly different flavors. They use different hops. They use some hybrid. Right? They brew it in a whiskey barrel, or they you know do it on a nitro tap where they put some grapefruit in it or something or whatever. But there's all kinds of different options that you kind of cross over, but you're still buying beer, but you have thousands of choices. All right, and same with things like that. So all of these things, you're buying that good or service, you're buying shoes, cereal, wine, etc. But your options are limitless, and you got to make a decision based on the price, based on the brand, based on the type of good, stuff like that. Okay. Okay. So the curve, I mean, the demand curve is going to look something like this. So remember, in pure competition, it was just perfectly elastic, like a flat line. In Monopoly, it was a steeper demand curve. And here, we have a downward sloping demand curve, see the green line, but the demand curve is probably a lot flatter because the consumer can shop around, and which would mean the demand curve is elastic because if the consumers raise the price too much, I mean, if the firm raises the price too much, then they're probably going to lose customers to the other firms who didn't raise the price. So these firms have to be very knowledgeable of what the going price for their good or service is, because if they charge too little, they're not going to make a profit. They're going to get dropped out of the market. If they charge too much, they're just going to lose all the customers to the substitutes, right? So this is I'd say most firms, this is actually like restaurants as well. So okay, so there's many. If you want to go out to eat, there's hundreds, there's thousands of options, right? But they're all competing with the same. They're all competing for dinner or lunch or whatever. Okay. So remember from last lecture, that the way we're going to do this is the firm. This is like an individual firm. Okay, they're going to look at the situation. Remember, our profit maximizing condition was when marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So that's the best they can do. Any quantity they choose individually below this, right, they can do better by increasing quantity. And any quantity they choose above this, they're going to be paying too much. So again, if you want to do the profit calculation and plug in a bunch of quantities above or below this optimal Q1, you're going to get a worse situation. So the best any individual firm can do is when MR, marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right there. And then the firm is going to choose that quantity and then look at the demand curve and see what price they should charge the consumers based on that quantity. Okay, so it's the same idea as the monopoly. The only difference, the big difference, is the demand curve is much more elastic, and the firm's probably going to make a little bit less profit because they have to be very conscious of what the other firms are charging. Okay, so remember, just like last time, this is revenue, price times quantity. This is cost, okay, at Q1. And so revenue minus cost is the leftover little green rectangle is the profit. Okay, so same process to choose quantity, choose price, and calculate profit as the monopolist. The only difference, which is a major difference, is that the demand curve is much more elastic. Okay, so this is a short run profit maximize or profit yielding scenario. This next one, slide 5, is a loss scenario. So uh, you're probably very familiar with these types of goods, that there's situations in which the firms can take a loss or even shut down in the short run. So there's unfortunately, especially during the last year, there were probably a lot of restaurants that had a short run loss. There are definitely a lot of craft breweries that had a short run loss. Probably the same for wineries, um, small bookstores, things like that. So if it turns out that their best case scenario, that MR equals MC, MR equals MC, the Q2 here. So you still want to do that, but in this case, here is revenue, right? Price times quantity. Here is cost, and in this case, revenue minus cost is that loss of that red rectangle there. Okay, so same process. Um, Best case, choose MR equals MC and choose the quantity. Find the price on the demand curve by plugging in the Q and charge that price. And if your cost is high enough, the firm's going to make a profit. If the cost is too high, if the cost is low enough, right? If the price is above your cost situation, you're going to make a profit. If the price is too low, if it's below your cost, if your cost is too high, you're going to take a loss in the short run. Okay, and you can probably see how we're kind of see how the price is based on the demand curve. And so when this demand curve is above the red cost line, you're making a profit. And when the demand curve is below the red cost line, you're taking a loss. And so in the long run, it kind of balances out where these firms leave in the long run. Firms enter here in the long run, it pushes it down. So the demand curve fluctuates around this point, which you can probably guess that the long run point is going to be just where that demand curve is tangent and where firms are making just a normal profit if they can stay in the market. So it kind of looks, so see how this is short run profits, short run losses, and then long run, that demand curve is right there. So instead of being above profit, below loss, it's just right tangent to that average total cost curve. Now, this is obviously hypothetical, but this is kind of the gravitational point for what we assume kind of occurs in the long run. Okay. Okay, so what's slide 9? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about product variety here. So there's of all these examples and many more we could probably think of. The firms in this industry, they're constantly managing price, product and advertising. So they have to worry about the price they should charge, right? They have to worry about the quality of their product and the features and advertising if they should do that. So you can probably guess that there's some firms that don't advertise and therefore they can charge a little bit lower price, but they have to compete with the firms that do advertise and get their brand or their features across and can charge a little bit higher price. So it's kind of a big trade-off between um, a lot of firms which charge like, or there's a lot of generic goods that, especially in like the pharmaceuticals that are very similar, um, but don't advertise, or even like cereals. There's a lot of cereals that like the big market ones, the Frosted Flakes and the Lucky Charms, they advertise. But you can also go to Trader Joe's and get some knockoff, or not knockoff, but Trader Joe's brand. They don't advertise those cereals. It's similar, but it's a little bit different. So Trader Joe's strategy is to have a unique product which is a little bit cheaper, but they're going to compete with the firms that advertise and charge a little bit higher price. And by advertising, you can kind of get your brand loyalty across. So there's probably a lot of customers who buy Frosted Flakes just based on the brand name, stuff like that. Okay, so because of all these options, there's a huge product differentiation that the firms get to choose from, and this probably leads to better advertising because the firms are competing with each other. Like you want to have the best cereal commercial. There's lots of shoe commercials. Um, car like you see tons of car commercials. So the cars in like the 20,000 to 40,000 range, they hugely advertise with each other. And so the idea here is that consumer benefits by a greater array of choices and better products. And so there's different types and styles, different brands and qualities here. And the idea is that if you're going for a brand name, you're paying a little bit higher price, but consumers better off are assumed to be better off because they have the choice, they can shop around, and they kind of balance between price, um, the the brand of the product, and the actual features of how well the product works. Okay, so we got some examples of monopolistic competition. We know that the main idea here is that we're selling slightly differentiated products, so the same type of good or service, but many different options. And our demand and MR curve, our demand curve is downward sloping but very elastic because of all the choices. And the marginal revenue curve is always, aside from the pure competition situation, the MR curve is always below the demand curve because each time, like if you look here, okay, so each time the firm to get the idea is to get a higher to get more consumers, you have to lower your price. So if you drop your price to get more consumers on the demand curve, the resulting marginal revenue is always less because if you charge a lower price to get more customers, the marginal revenue is less. So you're balancing between getting more customers and losing slightly more revenue on the margin, which is the idea here between demand and the MR curve. Okay, so in a minute we're going to talk about the second type of oligopoly today. I mean, the second type of market, which is oligopoly. We'll come back to monopolistic competition where we talk about advertising in a bit. Everyone clear on what the structure of monopolistic competition is and kind of the examples? Any questions on this type of market? Yeah, I'd say that most things that you buy, well, not most things, but a good portion of things you buy go under this type. Okay, so the next type of market we're going to discuss, and the last of the four options, is oligopoly. And let's introduce that on slide 10. Okay. So this type of market kind of comes in between um, monopolistic competition and monopoly, right? So it kind of goes in terms of like firm power or control over price, or let's just say market power. So if I were to rank the if I were to rank the markets in terms of market power, okay, so this will give you an idea of where the markets fit, and also a very good idea of what the demand curve should look like based on the substitutes available. So monopoly is the only seller, right? So they're going to have the most control over the price because they can do whatever they want, and they're going to have the steepest demand curve because there's no other options. The consumer can't shop around. This type of market, which we're about to talk about, has a few large producers, so they have some control over price, but they're still kind of interdependent on the other firms selling. Monopolistic competition, they can, if they have the additional revenue to advertise and pay for some additional features, they can do that. But and then number four, pure competition, they have no control over price. That's determined like we talked about last time in long run changes and shifts in the demand curve. Okay, so this is where they fit in, right? So oligopoly fits in between here. It's kind of ranked two in terms of market power and in terms of number of firms. So we have a few large firms or a few large producers, usually like less than 10. Okay, and we're producing a differentiated product, which is in the same category but slightly different, or just kind of the brand names really play a big role here. And there's limited control over price, so you can charge. So you'll see that um, the goods and services sold in this area are very similar in price, and the difference is their brand name and like their the deals stuff like that. So there's mutual interdependence, and there's some strategic behavior which we're going to talk about in the game theory section. Big entry barriers because it's very expensive to get into these types of markets, and mergers are often attempted because you can really gain a big control over the market if you can merge, especially if you can like cross between two boundaries, like a cell phone company and a cable company or something like that. Okay, let's let's think of some examples for this type for goods and services that go under oligopoly. So I'll use the usually I don't have this example, but I'll use that Fire Stick example because that's a good one. Because Netflix is a great one. So yeah, streaming services. Yeah, streaming services for sure. Cell phone like the so there's we'll separate between the cell phone um, what, the cell phone providers and the cell phone producers. Those are both oligopolies. Okay, so Netflix I put under streaming subscriptions. Um, yeah, cell phone. We'll call it cell phone plans, and you can also put in the cell phone like the cell phone uh, products or the cell phone types, or let's just say smartphones. Oh, that should be number three. Sorry. Okay, so and what could probably think of a few more examples, but where would I what do we call the Fire Stick? Is that like a I don't know how to categorize that. Like how do you categorize like the Fire Stick and the Roku and the Apple TV? We just call that like a smart something.
I have no clue. Probably like, I mean, smart TVs have them already built in, but I don't know, a streaming instrument? I don't know.
Yeah, because it's different from a streaming subscription because you can get the subscriptions through the yeah. How about that streaming device or
There you go.
yeah? There we go. Thank you. Streaming devices. So this okay, streaming devices. That's a good. And then also like operating systems. I think I'm missing another one. So or missing another big one. So the smartphones are the usually the go-to, and then streaming services have been the recent go-to. And what else would kind of go in this? Probably like could even throw in like what do you call those things? Um, tablets. How about that? Okay, so there's you kind of see the idea of there's you have some options or even or this one too. Um, but yeah, I think that would. I think we've got down to that. So I was also gonna throw in cable TV or satellite things like that. Uh, yeah. So right. So those yeah right. Android and iOS would go into the. Did I throw that up there somewhere? I think I put in smartphones. I think that would go into the smartphones area. And yeah, Microsoft and well, we'd have you have to specify what the product is. So if we're talking about like operating systems, you can put in Windows and Mac. What's the Mac operating system, Mac OS, and you can also talk about the different types of computers the two make. So if we talked about just like laptops, or they both competed in the tablet market as well. And so let me see. The only one I'm not 100% sure on is the Airbnb one because I don't know how many options do you have? I think Airbnb kind of like dominates the market, and there's a few other. Yeah, but you can even so yeah, if we can if there's only a few big providers like there might be now, then yeah, I think that would be a good one. I didn't really think of that because I usually assume that there's like there's multiple. I mean, you can go through like all these different options, but yeah, let's if we talk about the big ones, sure, that's a good one too. So, and then this one as well. Okay, so all of these, we've got too many examples, but so there's we got the streaming subscriptions like Netflix and Amazon Prime, and there's getting more of them. Hulu, Disney Plus. You got smartphones. We got cell phone plans. You got AT&T. You got Amazon. I mean, you got AT&T. You got Verizon. You got a few options there. You got the like Walmart has a brand now, I think. There's a few different types of smartphones, iPhones, Google Pixel, Android. Um, smart TVs. I think I missed that one. Sorry, that there's there's probably 10 competing brands for smart TVs. Um, Amazon Fire Stick and then Apple TV or the Roku if that's still around. Okay, we got that. Operating systems, Windows, Mac OS. There might be a few others still. Tablets, you got Microsoft, Apple. Right, all right, we get the idea. Okay, and then the last one I put in game consoles is a big one because there's always like four big firms that keep like one-upping each other, but they charge like each new version is always like the same exact price. They like get in a room and they're like, okay, here's our new consoles coming out. We're both going to charge like $500, and you kind of have to decide which one you want, right? It's almost like they charge like I think it's almost like the newest version of the PlayStation and what's the Microsoft one? The X, yeah, X. It's like almost like the newest version of each is like the exact same price. Like they just right. Okay. So these are right. These types of examples, pretty much all the technology stuff goes under this category, and this is the oligopoly type, right? So all this stuff is like tech stuff. All right. Um, okay. So oligopoly, kind of like I did the little ranking. If you can see that up here, this is number. So monopoly is one, oligopoly is two, which means that this is going to be a downward sloping demand curve, and probably more a steeper demand curve than monopolistic competition, but not as steep as monopoly because you have some options, but but not that many options. So if you want to buy a cell phone, you can choose between four different brands, but they're still going to charge you roughly the same price unless you go like you know completely off the wall with like no tech version. So you have some options, and really I think this is the one type of market where the prices are very similar, and you kind of have to choose between the brands. Like if you look at the streaming services, they're all charging about the same. The same with cell phones. Like a new cell phone is almost you kind of got to decide on the brand or the features you want. Okay, so demand curve more is less elastic than this one, but more elastic than Monopoly. So it's a little bit steeper than this, but a little less steep than Monopoly, just given the options. Okay, and we went through examples, and we know that our demand curve is going to be downward sloping, more in the inelastic region, and the MR curve is going to be just below it, but a little bit steeper. Okay. Now this is where we're going to throw in a little intro to game theory, and we'll have some practice problems in the homework as well for this type of market. So because of this is one of the most popular markets because you have big firms that are competing with each other, and so pure competition. There's not much the firms can do. They can just sell or not sell. Monopoly, they just do whatever they want. And this one, these two, you got to worry about what the other firms are doing. And so especially with oligopoly, it's much more of a you know get the next technology out or get the next feature out or get your brand name built or jump into a different type of market than it is the price. So you can see how difficult it is once these all these firms start getting into the market. It's very difficult to get in. Actually, the one market that seems like every month there's a new option is the streaming services. But other than that, most of these markets have been dominated by a few firms for a very long time. Okay, so slides 11 and 13 is going to throw in some game theory, and then we'll do some practice problems on this concept. Okay. Um, so the idea here is that there's mutual interdependence, which means that you have to worry about what the other firm is doing in terms of its advertising, its features, and its price before you make a big decision. There are lots of options for collusion, especially in terms of pricing, where it's no coincidence that the pricing of these devices is very similar, And so the firms know exactly, if not even have an agreement with one another on what to charge and what the customers will pay and what not to price to, like they know that they have good information on what the demand curves are, and they want to increase their price if they can, but not charge too much because you could lose customers. And we can kind of model these types of scenarios with game theory where we have two um, oligopolies kind of deciding either to act independently or make an agreement or even break the agreement and cheat in this concept. So if we look here at slide 12, it's going to be more clear when we do an example, but the idea is we're going to have two firms competing. So this is some hypothetical firm, Uptown, and this is some other hypothetical firm, Rare Air, or these must be like, oh, I don't know what they're selling, but it doesn't really matter. So each firm, this firm has an option to sell a low price or a high price, and this firm has an option to sell a low price and a high price. And kind of the bottom yellow one goes to this firm, the payouts, and the top blue one goes to this firm. And so the idea is that we have different options, and then the outcomes are paid out when those two options, intersect. So for example, if this is just an example, but if this firm were to charge a high price and this firm were to charge a high price, they both get 12 million or whatever this, let's just say 12. If they both charge a low price, they'd both get 8. But you can see if one firm is able to undercut the other and charge a lower price for a very similar product, they'll get a lot more of the revenue because the firms will react, the customers will react to the lower price. Like I guarantee if um, at least temporarily, if like there was a new version of Xbox and PlayStation, and all of a sudden Xbox was like, we're our new game consoles are $50. All right, they'd make a killing. I don't know if they could cover their costs, but every customer would just buy the Xbox, right, compared to the $500 PlayStation. Now that's probably not a good strategy because eventually the other firm would lower the price and they'd get to a point where they can't cover their costs, but you can see the idea. So if the customers see a clear lower price, right, a very big discount, they're going to go to the other firm. So they don't want to get to a situation with these two firms where one firm is charging much lower than the other because it's going to cause a pricing war, and that's bad for both firms. All right. So the idea is if we look on this next slide, you can kind of see what happens. That if you look at it from the perspective of each firm, it's kind of hard to see without doing it as an example, but like you want to look at what the other firm is doing for your decision. So if we were to look at the decision making of Uptown over here, all right, let's look at what they would do in response to what Rare Air would do. So let's see if I can highlight this. So if Rare Air were to price high, see the two options that Uptown has, they can price high and get 12, or they can price low and get 15. So without any agreement, they're going to price low and get the 15, right? Now, if Rare Air were to price low, oops, Uptown could price high and get 6, or price low and get 8. So they're going to price low again. So the idea is that without any agreement, the to minimize the risk and to get the best outcome without any collusion, this firm's going to price low every time. And when we do it from the other way, like if you look at what Rare Air would do in response to Uptown, if Uptown prices high, Rare Air can price high and get 12 or low and get 15. They're going to price low because they get a better payout. And if Uptown were to price low, Rare Air could price high and get 6 or price low and get 8, and they're going to price low. So without any agreement, because they don't want to get to the scenario where the other firm undercuts them, the best outcome is for both firms to price low, right, and get the payout of 8. So without any agreement, um, if the firms just do what their best response is to minimize the risk, they're going to both price low and get 8 million. But you can see if the firms trust each other and they can make an agreement, they can both agree to price high and they can both get 12. So it's kind of a trade-off here between if they don't trust each other, they're just going to do what they want to do to minimize the risk if both price low. But if they do trust each other, they don't think they're going to break the agreement. They can both agree to price high, get the 12 million. But the third option is they make the agreement, one firm breaks the agreement, and then they're back to one of these scenarios. So there's kind of three options here. So no agreement, no collusion. Best case is when they collude, but worst case is when they collude and one of the firms cheats or breaks the agreement. So this one, panel square D, is no collusion. Panel A is they both agree and collude. In panel C or panel D is when one of the firms cheats on the agreement and undercuts the other. Okay, so it's kind of a it's a simple example, but it kind of it's a nice representation, even though simplified, of what can happen in this type of market. Okay, so we'll do some examples in a minute on some more game theory, but I think we get the idea of what we're trying to do here. And so we'll keep it this, and so this type of um, discipline or this type of study, game theory is it's very popular in terms of or depending on the who you're looking at, but you can deep dive into this. You can take multiples of classes on game theory. There's much more um, there's much more advanced models that look at more than one firm or different like what's the term is like one firm goes first, one firm goes second, and so on. And so if you're interested in this type of thing, you can really explore it. And there's you can spend a whole year just looking at game theory courses, right? So okay, advertising. Okay, slides 22 to 23, and then slide 25. Okay, so just a few little slides on advertising and how this kind of ties in. You get so we see why if I when I listed the all right, so when I listed the types of markets, monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition, and pure competition, so you can see why there's not really a reason to advertise for monopolies because they have the whole market, and the purely competitive firms, they don't have any control over price, so it does them no good to advertise because they'd just be wasting money to charge the same price. But oligopoly and monopolistic competition firms in this chapter, right? They're competing with other firms selling something a little bit different, and so sometimes a nice advertising campaign can set them ahead, and they can. It's a trade-off between do you spend the advertising budget to get more customers, or do you not advertise and just hope that your lower cost product will offset the losses of not advertising. Okay, so what these firms do is there's a bunch of different options, but they can develop different products and features, or they can advertise, or they can change the price. That's really the only. I mean, when you look at all these types of goods and services, what they're competing with is technology, so features, product development, research and development, advertising, or increasing or decreasing the price. Those are the three main categories. Now, advertising is a lot harder to duplicate. Like if you have a good advertising campaign, like like uh, the AT&T campaign with whatever her name is, but they've really developed a campaign that kind of keeps going and going, and it's difficult for other cell phone companies to get kind of compete with that snowball of that story of advertising, and so it's much more difficult to replicate an advertising campaign than just to change the price. And so if you can get a good advertising campaign going, it might be beneficial. But advertising is especially now, it's very expensive. And so you got to be able to advertise. Um, but just know that any firm that advertises, whether it's big or small, they're like you're paying a higher price for any product that's advertised, and so the increase in price is going to be reflected in the advertising budget. So any firm that advertises is absolutely charging you a higher price than not advertising. Okay, so what are some positive effects of advertising? Okay, it could be a low-cost way of providing information to customers. It can enhance competition because if um, the Android has it comes out with a waterproof technology, then Apple might respond with their waterproof or their some wireless charger. So if you see what the other firms are doing, it might increase competition, which is kind of the same thing of speeding up technological progress. And it can kind of help firms obtain economies of scale if they can get to a spot where they get enough firms that like Apple's kind of done this in the iPhone situation where they've had the economies of scale or the majority of the smartphone market for something like 10 years, and it's been very difficult, although some firms have done it to kind of get into that market. All right, and then slide 25 I think is the negative effects. All right, so we talked about positive effects in terms of what the firm gains, and some negative effects on how it affects the customer is it can be some advertising can be very manipulative. It can contain lots of misleading claims, or like the actual information is like in a fine print. So I can kind of think of a couple examples where so some advertising like one of the best cases for like a advertising campaign that doesn't really um, tell you any information about the product. It just kind of gives you an experience would be this. Like, okay, so everyone's seen a Corona beer ad, and I'm pretty sure that like nothing is ever talked about in terms of what the beer is or what it tastes like or what type of beer. Like, there's no information about the beer at all. It's just this is if you drink this beer, you're gonna be on a beach. Everyone's gonna be attractive, and this you're gonna have a good time. So it does. You can see how it's kind of like a psychological advertising where they don't say anything about the beer at all, like what the alcohol content is, what type of beer it is, anything like the price. It's just that you're gonna be on a beach, you're gonna have the best time ever, and that's why you're gonna drink Corona, right? And it must work because they keep doing it. Okay. Also, you can see this. Um, you're probably very familiar with like ads for cell phone plans or like cable companies that'll say like the the plan starting at $49, but then in fine print it says if you bundle with everything else. So it's only $49 if you bundle it with two other things that are also $49. So you got to read the fine print because the big number is only the selling point, right? So it's correct, but it's only if you bundle it. So that's these are some things how like uh, advertising can negatively affect consumers. And also the big thing is consumers pay a higher price for any good or service that's advertised. So you can see that if you buy any cereal or any like the the big beer companies are a good one here. So all the big companies like Coors and Budweiser and Miller, they have huge advertising campaigns. But if you go to any like small microbrewery, they don't advertise at all because they can't afford it, and so they're kind of competing with unique products and hopefully better quality. And that's why it's very difficult to compete with firms that kind of gain that advantage in these advertising campaigns to get that brand across like those ones. Okay, last thing is the specific internet oligopolies on slide 28. Okay, and so this textbook is a couple years old, and so these slides are a couple years old, or the textbook ones are, not my study guides. But you can see that these four internet oligopolies, which are listed here, they're all pretty much the same. Like nothing changed in terms of I mean, some things changed, but in terms of the leaders in these industries, they're all the same. So in 2 years, these firms have all maintained their uh, like oligopoly dominance in these areas. So the idea here is that these are not monopolies, but they're the by far the leader in these categories. So Google is has 90% of the search engine traffic. You can use other options. You could use Bing or you can use Microsoft, whatever it is. But the search engine market is dominated by Google. Okay, the same with Amazon. You can go to different. You can buy online shopping items from thousands, if not millions, of sellers, but Amazon dominates that market. Facebook, especially since the time they bought Instagram, still has a huge majority of the social media market, and I'd say that Apple probably still has the majority of the smartphone and tablet market. Okay, so these aren't monopolies because you have options, but these are the dominant forces in each of these categories. So it's not always the case where you have like um, two or three firms competing with the same market share. It's often that you have, especially in the oligopolies in the internet age, it's some big firms, and you can see how successful these four firms have been, and it's been very difficult for other firms to get into these specific categories, right? So, you know, some other firms have tried, like whoever makes Bing. Um, there's some other big online shopping, especially international companies like Alibaba, and you have TikTok here, which is a competitor, but compared to Facebook and Instagram, probably not so much. And there's other options for smartphones, but Apple has most of them. Okay. Um, Questions on any of the concepts from monopolistic competition and what goes into that market and or oligopoly? Okay. All right. So there's some videos you can look at. Monopolistic competition, oligopoly, and then a big one on game theory. All right. So you can take a look at those. Now let's now look at um, there's a couple examples I want to go through which are on game theory. And so we'll go through those, and this will set you up for the homework question, which has a game theory one, and there's definitely going to be a game theory question on the take-home final. Okay, so I'll kind of walk you through how it works, and there's kind of a three or so steps to follow to solve it, and they're kind of a bigger example of the one we went through in the slides. But let's look at the first one, uh, and then I'll kind of show you what we did to get this. So number one. Okay, so refer to the following payoff matrix, and then you're going to answer the questions based on it. So here we have, this is some firm Y, and this is some firm X, and they can each price, so the price of the good can either be 35 or 40 for each of the firms. And the payouts, um, this number goes to Y, the bottom number, and the top corner goes to X. So these are X's payouts, and these are Y's payouts. So for example, if they both price at 40, Y gets 60 and X gets 57. So those are the payouts, given the two pricing strategies. So what you want to do in these type of questions is first, if the this is called a payoff matrix. If the payoff matrix isn't provided, you're going to have to draw a little diagram and just illustrate the problem like this. So the first part is usually to set up the diagram, or just I usually recommend to like draw it again even if it's provided, because it gives you an idea of what the problem is doing. And then part A is going to be to find the outcome when there's no collusion. Part B is going to be to find the outcome when they make an agreement, if they can, and part C is what's the outcome if one of the firms cheats. Now, sometimes there won't be an agreement because one or more of the firms might not want to change their option. In that case, the problem will be a little bit different, but the idea is the same. So first, let me show you kind of how we get the part A when there's no collusion. All right. So I replicated the example in Excel here, and you can kind of see it. And if you don't, I mean, when you do the homework and the take-home exam, you can either use my Excel file as a template, or you can just do it on a piece of graphing paper if that's easier. It's kind of up to you. It's just easier for me to show it virtually like this. So part A is always going to be, okay, assuming no collusion between the two firms, what is the likely outcome? And you're going to list the strategies and the payouts. So what you want to do is go through the options of both firms and find their best choice given the other firm's options. And then the option that occurs when both firms are choosing that, like when either both firms are always choosing something or one firm is always choosing something and the firm is responding to that, is going to be your answer. So kind of go back here. All right, so let me erase these things and we'll kind of. Okay. All right, so this diagram just represents the problem where here's Y. Y can price at 35 and 40. Here's X. X can price at 40 and 35. And these are the outcomes. And I just list them. The way I do it in this is just the first payout goes to the left side. So the first number always goes to Y, or the firm on the left. And the second number always goes to the top, or the firm on the right. Okay, so the second number goes to X. The first number goes to Y. Okay? So what you want to do is kind of go through and see with no collusion, what would each firm do in response to the other firm? So let's start with X pricing at 40. So if X prices at 40, Y can price at 40 and get 60, or price at 35 and get 69. So you can see what Y is going to do. If it knows that X is going to price at 40, it wants the higher outcome of pricing at 35 to get the 69. So I kind of like, you, you can underline or circle the outcome. So see how this outcome is better than this outcome. So X is going to, or Y is going to do that. So I'm going to highlight or underline that outcome. This one. Okay. So what about if X prices at 35? What's Y going to do? So if X prices at 35, Y can price at 40 and get 55, or price at 35 and get 58. So the best option, if X prices at 35, is for Y to price at 35. See that? This is bigger than this, so this will be the option. So no matter what, without collusion, Y is going to price at 35. Heck. Oh, let me just put it like a. Okay, well, I can't underline it. Anyway, so see how given both options from X, Y is going to price at 35. Now you could probably guess that this is going to go similarly for X, but let's look at what X would do in response to Y. So if Y prices at 40, X can price at 40 and get 57, or 35 and 59. Okay, X is going to price at 35 and get the extra 2. Okay, and then finally, if Y would have priced at 35, X could price at 40 and get 50, or X could price at 35 and get 55. X is going to price at 35 because this is an extra 5. Okay, so see the idea is that without any collusion, the outcome is going to be the case in which both firms are choosing their best response, given the other firms, and so we determined that no matter what, without any collusion, that both firms are always going to price at 35. Right, so this will be the outcome, and it's always going to be, if you do it like this, it's going to be the outcome of which both numbers are underlined or circled. So see here, no one's choosing that. Only X is choosing that, and only Y is choosing that. But here, they both chose their best option. So if you look through the outcomes in which both numbers are underlined or chosen, it's going to be this one. Okay, so if you followed that, this is the outcome you're going to describe, which is going to essentially be when both firms are pricing at 35 and Y gets 58 and X gets 55. Okay, so see, I put that there, and the answer technically is with if you list the strategies first and the payout second. See how Y gets 35. I mean, Y prices at 35, X prices at 35. So these are the strategies, 35 and 35, and these are the outcomes. So uh, Y gets 58 and X gets 55. So the when you list the answer here, just list the strategies first, or the decisions first, and then the outcome second. And you can just list uh, the left player first and the right player second, or the top player second. Okay, so it's important to understand how you get part A because the rest of it kind of flows with part A. So does everyone see got how I kind of analyzed part A and how you get to the outcome here for no collusion? Okay, do we see kind of how to approach this one? Okay. Okay. Well, if you got that one, then so part A is to list the outcome, strategies and payouts, no collusion. So these are the strategies. Then you list the payouts second. Okay. So first you want to be able to do it on the diagram, and then you want to be able to list the outcome you chose. Right. So we're just describing this scenario, which is 35, 35, outcome 58, 55. In part B, now assume X and Y can reach a collusive agreement. What is the outcome? So what you want to do for part B is look on the payoff matrix and see if there's any scenario in which both firms can benefit by charging a different price. And if you look, um, right, we started here. Okay, we started with panel A. We found that that was the outcome. But look at the other options. So if you go up here, um, firm Y is worse off. If you go here, firm X is worse off. But if you go here, look what happens. They both price high. Uh, Y gets +2 and X gets +2. So if they can both agree to give the customers no option and charge 40 instead of 35, they're both going to benefit by higher revenue because they're charging a higher price. So if they can keep this agreement of agreeing to price high, they're both going to improve. So see that? So if the agreement can be held, they want to do this, and both charge at 40, and they both get an extra 2. So the outcome in which they can reach a collusive agreement and maybe keep it is this one. So you describe this outcome in which they're both better off. So the outcome for panel B is 40-40 are the prices, and the payouts are 60 and 57, right? Part C. Now let's say that they make an agreement and one or the other firm cheats on the agreement, which means they just agree to it but undercut them anyways. So C, there might be a temptation to cheat on the collusive agreement. What's the likely outcome if Y cheats? Now you can do it from either perspective, but let's just pick one. Because if they both cheat, then it just goes back to this one. But if they make an agreement and Y cheats, what happens? Okay, so see that here is when there's no collusion. Here is when they make an agreement and both benefit. But what if they make the agreement and Y cheats? If Y cheats, that means that Y undercuts and charges the higher price. And so instead of being this, uh, they're saying they're both going to price at 40. But what if instead Y prices at 35, X gets screwed over and still prices at 40? Then this becomes the outcome. Okay, so this is no collusion, collusion. Y cheats and charges a lower price, in which Y gets 69 and X gets 50. Okay, so this outcome, if Y cheats, is Y prices at 35, not 40. X still prices at 40, and then the outcome is Y gets 69 and X gets 50. Okay, so that's kind of what you do. So the initial part is you replicate the diagram, and then do the collusion, the no collusion, the collusive agreement if there is one, and then if one of the firms cheats. Okay, let's do one more. Number 2. So here we have two aircraft oligopolies. This is firm B and firm A, and they're deciding either to build another aircraft or not build. So obviously they get revenue from the customers if they build the aircraft, but they got to worry about the cost. So is it the best option to build the aircraft or not? Well, let's see. So here's the payoff matrix, and part A is assuming no collusion between A and B. What's the likely outcome, strategies, and payouts? So let's again, you always do part A. Uh, okay, so let's start. So this is I replicated the diagram. So this is firm B's can either build an aircraft, don't build. Firm A can either build an aircraft or don't build, and the first number always goes to B, and the second number always goes to A. All right, so you can, yeah. All right, so let's again go through the uh, options of each firm. So each firm has two options. All right, so we have to do this, analyze it from both sides. So let's first start with firm B. If firm A builds an aircraft, firm B can either build and get 10 or don't build and get 0. All right, pretty clear that firm B is going to build. Okay, if firm A doesn't build, firm B can build and get 25 or don't build and get 0. All right, so firm B is always, doesn't matter what firm A does, firm B is going to build. Okay, so we determined that firm B is going to build no matter what. All right, so what's firm A going to do in response to firm B? So if firm B builds, firm A can build and lose 10 or don't build and get 0. So the best case here for firm A is just not to build, not lose the 10 and get the 0. Okay, if firm were to not build, firm B could build and get 25 or don't build and get 0. So firm A's decision base is depends on what firm B were to do. So in this case, firm A would respond by building because 25 is bigger than 0. Okay, so this one's a little bit different, see, because last time we had a scenario where both firms are always going to do the same thing without collusion. Here, firm B is always going to build, but firm A is only going to respond differently based on what firm B does. Okay, but really what's going to happen is that firm B is always going to build. So if firm B is going to build, then the only option for firm A to get the best outcome is don't build. So see how this option, uh, A wouldn't choose it, B wouldn't choose this, no one chooses this one, and this is the only outcome in which both numbers are underlined or chosen. Okay, so this is going to be the outcome of no collusion, right? Because firm B is always going to build, and firm A's response to firm B building is don't build. Okay, so this is probably a situation in which firm A has a little more control of the market and it has a little bit higher economies of scale. And so the reason why this is probably the case is if firm A is going to build another aircraft, they're going to get the more revenue and they probably have low costs. Now firm A can build another aircraft, but it looks like the cost to build that aircraft doesn't recoup the revenue. And so if they know that firm B is going to build, they don't want to build because they're not going to cover their cost. So this is the outcome. Okay, so what, so we know collusion, what is the outcome? And once you do the analysis, just list the strategies and the payouts. So the strategies are firm B builds, firm A doesn't build, outcomes, firm B gets 25 and firm A gets 0. Okay, so that's strategies, and that's the payouts for firm A and firm B respectively. Now part B is the same, but it's a little bit different. So B, is it likely that A and B will reach a collusive agreement? So let's look. All right. Well, since there's no part B, you probably guessed it, but the reason is because we're here. All right. So to reach an agreement, it would have to benefit both firms. And this case is better for firm A. I mean, sorry. This case is better for firm A. This case doesn't matter. So the only place firm A would want to go to be better off is here. But why would firm B do that? Because they're already getting 25. So if you look at the 10 and the 0 and the 0, uh, there's no scenario in which moving would be better for firm B. So they're not going to make an agreement because they're already getting the best outcome, right? So firm B dominates this market, and just by building, they get the most revenue. So why would firm B make any of these other agreements, right? If they both agree not to build and cut costs, that's not going to benefit firm B because the revenue they get from building offsets the not building. All right, so basically there's no scenario in which firm B would want to make an agreement because firm B is always getting the best outcome. Firm A would like to change, but firm B is not going to sign that pen. Okay, so here, because of the outcomes, firm A and firm B will not reach a collusive agreement, and this is because firm B is already getting the best possible outcome of 25, and there's no incentive for firm B to make a collusive agreement. Okay, so you kind of gotta make sure you understand the logic here, where you always first of all represent the diagram first and get that down. Part A is always find the no collusion outcome, and part B is look and see if they can reach an agreement, which is going to benefit both firms. If they can, then they would, or you can at least list it. But in this case, because one of the firms isn't going to want to make an agreement, they're not going to do it. So we don't have to do part C here. First of all, because there is no part C, but second of all, because there's no cheating opportunity. There's no way for B to undercut A because they're not going to make an agreement at all, and B is just going to do what it wants. And firm A's only response is to not build because they're not going to get the revenue back from building. Okay, so same idea, but part B might be different depending on if they can reach an agreement. And if they do reach an agreement, list it, and then part C is what if one of the firms cheats. If they don't reach an agreement, say that, and then part C, there is no part C if they don't reach an agreement. Okay, so um, this my Excel file, which just has the payoff matrices, is here, and that's up on Blackboard. If you want to use that for a template, it might be, you know, I assume that a lot of you will just kind of draw this on graphing paper or a piece of paper with a ruler. You don't have to do it in Excel, but if you want to, you can use this as an example. Okay, so questions on these types of game theory ones, like, and kind of like you get a nice little preview of the two types, where you always draw the diagram, list the outcome for no collusion, and then find out if they'll reach an agreement. If so, what is it, and what if one of the firms cheats? If they won't reach an agreement, just say that, and there's no part C because there's no cheating. All right. Okay, you're welcome. All right, so let's. Okay, so I think um, if everyone feels good on the game theory, that's it for the examples for this chapter. Okay, so your homework assignment, it incorporates both chapters, I think, or maybe let's see what I did here. So if you get a homework assignments, like, oh no, we've only done, what am I talking about? We've only done one chapter. All right, so homework assignments, chapter 9, this is going to be due next Monday. Okay, so there's only two questions. One on kind of a nice little summary of the four market types we talked about. So number one, okay, not this is a very low tech question, but the four market models. So economists who study, it's called industrial organization, divide markets into four types. List each market structure. All right, the four we talked about in chapter uh, 7, 8, 9. And you can describe each market structure in 1 to 2 sentences and provide one example of each. And so this one you can either do like a couple short paragraphs, or you can also do just kind of bullet points. So if you want to just kind of make a little, like a chart with bullet points with examples, you can do that. Or if you want to describe it in a few sentences, you can do that. But just list the four types. Okay, and remember, and the four types are the ones we just talked about: monopoly, oligopoly, monopolistic competition, and peer competition. And just kind of list the main features of each and throw an example in for each one and kind of just get, you don't have to get everything, but just kind of get the gist of each market and kind of an example of each. So you can use the examples we talked about in class. Um, you don't have to, I mean, if you have a better example, you can put that too. Just don't give a wrong example. All right, that one. And then number two is a nice little game theory question. And here, the only difference between what we did now and what you're going to do here is I give you a little word problem and you got to set up the payoff matrix. So all you have to do is kind of use the information in the question, draw the payoff matrix, and then do the questions. So part A is going to be go through the question, and part A is going to be draw the payoff matrix. So you're just going to draw this thing. Or I closed it. But you know what I mean. So draw the payoff matrix either in Excel or just on graphing paper, and then find the outcome with no collusion. Okay. Part C is that if they can reach um, a collusive agreement, what is it? And then if they can reach an agreement, what's the incentive if one of the firms cheats? Okay, so the same steps we did in those two examples. The only difference is you got to set up the decision matrix, which is just kind of draw the box. All right. questions on what I want you to do for the homework for chapter 9? All right. I think that's what I wanted to cover for tonight. So we're just about done with tonight's lecture and tonight's material. So just a reminder that the chapter 7 and the chapter 8 homework are due today. So get those in by tonight and post them here. And the chapter 9 homework, which we just presented, is due next Monday, right? Just like it says in the syllabus. And then if you are, if you're doing any, actually, we're only going to do like the main model or the main concept of chapter 16. So if you're reading the chapters um, beforehand or after, it probably gave you some good discussions. But uh, if you were going to pick one chapter not to read, uh, I'd probably not read chapter 16 because we're only going to do a very small portion of it and kind of focus on one main model. But I think if you have the textbook, and read chapters 7, 8, 9, you'd probably get a good discussion. But we're only going to cover a very small portion of chapter 16. It's a kind of a big international trade model, um, and that's what we'll do next time. So homework chapter 7, homework chapter 8 due today, uh, homework chapter 9 due next week, and then next week we'll cover chapter 16, which is kind of this big, international trade concept that kind of builds upon the um, production possibilities curve. All right, so I think if everyone is good on the homework and doesn't have any questions, we can wrap it up here. So I think that's it for tonight. And thank you all for joining and have a good week. And I'll see you next Monday.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Professor.
Yeah. So okay, yeah. So everyone's. Oh, do you want me to stop the recorder? I'll just stop. I'll stop the recording. Just so.